a woman of integrity, character, and ability, has a good mind, the courage of her convictions. From the poverty of St. Louis to the bright lights of California, beyond that to the powerful halls of the Congress. She makes us feel better with us fighting to get Aristide back to Haiti, Mandela free from prison in Robbins Island in South Africa, fighting for our 8488 campaign. She has always been, and we thank her so much. She'll make America better and Wall Street more accountable. Brothers and sisters, I want to do some little jest here. Jackie, bring on Maxine. Say something.
First, let me thank all of you for being here today. It's a blessing to live long enough to see God deliver to his people a magnificent human being. A woman who has been a friend to the locked out, to the underserved, to the disenfranchised, all of her political life. I am so grateful and consider this, Reverend Jackson, a rare and unique privilege to introduce to you one of the finest, one of the most remarkable women in these United States and all of the world. My friend, my sister, my mentor, and a woman I love, Maxine Waters. Thank you.
Jacqueline Jackson, thank you so very, very much for that very generous introduction. I am honored and delighted to be here today with the entire Jackson family. I want you to know that this family is extremely special for and in this country. I want you to know that Reverend Jesse Jackson is a gem that came to us and provided the kind of leadership that required sacrifice. He has made some extraordinary sacrifices. But I want you to know that the entire family, Jesse Jr., Jonathan, Santia, little Jackie, Yusef, they're all a family of strength and courage, committed to the proposition that our people can and must do better. Give them a big round of applause. I love them dearly, and Jacqueline Jackson is someone that I feel I can talk to about anything at any time. And sometimes that which we talk about has nothing to do with Jesse Jackson or anybody else. It's about us talking about us. Jackie, thank you so very much. I appreciate you and I love you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it was important for me to be here today to be with Reverend Jesse Jackson on the Wall Street Project. After 22 years of struggling, 22 years of educating, 22 years of trying to help Wall Street understand and to help our people understand that this democracy is supposedly about all of us and our ability to participate and to have the opportunity to gain wealth and to be prosperous and to be a part of what has been held out to us is a possibility. And so I'm delighted to be here today to say thank you to Reverend Jackson for your 22 years of focusing on what we need to do to build wealth in this country. Thank you for sticking with it when many people did not understand what you were even discussing. Thank you for traveling to Washington, D.C., time and time again, meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus and others, talking about what we should do, what we could do to open up these opportunities on Wall Street. And so with that, I have prepared a few thoughts today about some of these efforts and where I think we are and what I think we can do. The Rainbow Push Wall Street's project's work to promote inclusion and equal opportunity on Wall Street is absolutely critical. Its mission must be shared and pursued widely. I want to talk a minute about the wealth gap. At its core, the Wall Street Project is about building wealth. Reverend Jesse Jackson's work here is vital because there is a large wealth gap in our country between African Americans and other ethnic groups. The median wealth of white households is 10 times that of black households and 8 times that of Hispanic households. These lopsided wealth ratios are the largest since the government began punishing such data a quarter century ago, and roughly twice the size of the ratios that existed between these three groups for the 2 decades prior to the Great Recession that ended in 2009. Moreover, in 2016, lower-income white households had a net worth of $22,900 compared with only $5,000 for black households and $7,900 for Hispanic households in this income tier. These disparities rise when you factor gender into the equation. Across all racial and ethnic groups, the wealth gap between rich and poor has widened. In the United States, the share of wealth held by the richest 10% of households stands at 79%. The bottom 60% of U.S. households only hold 2.4% of household wealth. There's even greater gender wealth inequality when looking across the individual racial lines. Since the 2015 Asset Funders Network report, the median wealth of single white women was $15,640. In contrast, the median wealth for single black women and Latino women was $200 and $100, respectively. About 1 cent for every dollar of white women's wealth. The racial wealth gap isn't incidental. It has been perpetrated and widened precisely because of policy choices made by lawmakers and the systemic racism that plagues these policies. When this president pushes to cut, for example, community block grants to pay for billionaire tax cuts, a very clear statement is made. Fixing the wealth gap is not a national priority. Expanding it is. America has a problem when it comes to providing opportunities for people of color to build wealth, and Wall Street is emblematic of that problem. The asset management industry has about $70 trillion in assets under management, and in 2016 generated an estimated annual profit of $100 billion. In some respects, the racial wealth gap isn't a gap as the term applies to African Americans accessing wealth. It's a chasm. When we look at African American household wealth, we know that for every dollar whites have, African Americans have 1 dime. But on Wall Street, for every dollar white asset management firms manage, African American firms have 1 penny. So let's talk about this systemic exclusion of diverse asset managers, for example. In 2017, the Government Accountability Office released a report. I requested that report with Representative Meeks and Senator Booker on diverse asset managers and federal pension programs. The results of the report were certainly unsettling. The report found that even though there is $70 trillion in assets currently under management by asset management firms, minority and women-owned firms only manage 1% of that amount. The report noted the challenges minority and women-owned firms face in breaking this glass ceiling, including investors' preference for brand names or companies that they're familiar with, a false assumption that minority and women-owned firms aren't as good as managing funds as their majority-owned counterparts, and the old canard that minority and women-owned firms are too small to compete. Make no mistake, they are not the reasons why these firms aren't being included. These are excuses. And ladies and gentlemen, they're old and tired excuses. I want to tell you a little bit something about, the California pension funds that included emerging asset managers. And even though they still have a ways to go, we were able to make some accomplishments, which helped me to understand the possibilities. Of course, those excuses that I just referred to are ones that I encountered 30 years ago when I was in the California State Legislature, and I was working to get the two largest pension funds in my home state of California, that is CalSTRS and CalPERS, to open up management of their assets to diverse asset managers. I heard from diverse asset managers, an old friend like Mark Cazenave and Victor McFarland, about the challenges that they faced. Unfortunately, the pension funds were resistant to change. However, when I chaired the Ways and Means Subcommittee of number 1 in the California State Assembly, and CalSTRS and CalPERS were not yet self-funded, I used my power as chair of that subcommittee to hold up their budgets until they committed to uphold diversity in the management of their assets and their staffs. So, in 1991, CalPERS began using emerging asset managers. In 2000, CalPERS formally established its Emerging Asset Managers Program. Although California's passage of Proposition 209 in 1996 explicitly prohibits the use of race or ethnicity in selecting contractors for state programs, CalPERS has focused on what we then created as merging asset managers, which includes diverse asset management firms. CalPERS recently concluded a 5-year plan to strengthen and expand upon its investments with what is emerging asset management firms, including those owned by minorities and women. According to its last report, in this effort as of June 2016, CalPERS, the nation's largest pension fund, has invested $8 billion in emerging asset manager programs, and of this amount, $4.5 billion was invested with diverse asset managers. But that's just the beginning. There's a lot more that can be done. And so we need to look at this and understand the challenges facing diverse investment bankers, for example. Diverse investment bankers also have challenges. They were challenged in obtaining opportunities with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And this is why I worked on legislation, specifically Section 1319A of the Federal Housing Enterprises Financial Safety and Soundness Act of 1992 that was eventually signed into law. The legislation required Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to establish minority outreach programs to ensure the inclusion to the maximum extent possible of minority and women-owned businesses in the enterprise's contracts. This legislation led to the creation of Fannie Mae's Access and Freddie Mac's Golden Opportunities programs, which allowed minority and women-owned firms to underwrite the debt of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. In 2008, after monitoring the progress of these programs, I wrote more legislation, which was included in the Housing Economic Recovery Act of 2008, which further mandated the inclusion of all levels of business activities for minority and women-owned firms. According to some accounts, these programs have been somewhat helpful in increasing the participation of minority and women-owned businesses in underwriting this debt. And what role now have the big banks provided? What opportunities have they provided in diverse asset managers? I tell you a little bit about what we did in California with PERS and STIRS, and also what we did with Fannie and Freddie, because I want to demonstrate somewhat what is possible and how we have gotten started with the whole idea of real diverse participation. However, I want you to understand that those are beginnings. After all of these years, we're still struggling to have the adequate kind of participation that's so well needed. A bit about the role of big banks in providing opportunities for diverse asset managers. Although the GAO report that I requested found that the Federal Retirement Investment Board could do much more to expand opportunities for diverse asset managers, the report didn't address the role big banks play in this space and the decided lack of opportunities that big banks provide for diverse asset managers. According to one estimate, the top 3 U.S. banks by asset size, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, have a combined total of $2.4 trillion in assets under management. Of that amount, $800 billion is externally managed, which simply means they contract that out. How much of that amount is managed by diverse asset managers is the question. We don't have all of the data yet, and I will be getting that data. I'm told by professionals in this space that it's probably less than 1%. These very same banks required a combined $940 billion in taxpayer support during the financial crisis and received an estimated $8.2 billion in tax relief from this president's recent tax scam in 2018 alone. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that it's 5%. The Knight Foundation, a private endowment that has studied the business case for diversity, now invests 22% of its holdings, or $500 million, with diverse asset managers. If the Knight Foundation can see the value and make change, why can't the big banks see it? Let me just stop for a moment and say this. I know that the big banks are involved in our communities in different ways. They support many of our activities. They're at our church banquets. They have foundations, and they contribute to foundations in various communities throughout this country. And they do the kinds of things that would help minorities believe and understand that the big banks are truly supportive of our communities. However, what I want to try to make clear today is I am not talking about 50 cents to the Boy Scouts or 25 cents to the Girl Scouts. I'm talking about real involvement. Thank you, big banks, for that you do with your foundations and otherwise. But now I just referred to the lack of diverse asset managers in all that you contract out. And so I want to know why you cannot contract with diverse firms, why you cannot contract with minority firms. The excuses are over. And frankly, I'm tired of seeing my friend, Reverend Jesse Jackson, struggle year in and year out, begging, pleading, asking, and not getting responded to in ways that are substantial. And I have been doing this for far too long. The gig is up. Today is it. want this day to go down in honor of Reverend Jesse Jackson in ways that is described as this is a new day. This is a new day, and we're not simply begging. We're not simply pleading. A black woman has the gavel now. And I've lived too long, experienced too much, struggled too hard not to use it. They will hear the sound of my gavel all over the world. It's about time that our country, our democracy, our big businesses who benefit from all of us, by all of us investing in ways that we do. Even when we don't have very much money, we utilize these banks. They have what we put in the banks in our little savings. And yet, we find that there are some banks who do some outrageous things. Create accounts in consumers' names that they don't even know about. Trying to make their investors believe that they are growing. And they're doing this with our money. We also have forced insurance by the banks when we don't need it, and we already have insurance, and we have to struggle to find out about these things. And of course, recently, even after 2008, when we went through the crisis, the recession in this country, almost a depression, we still have banks that are foreclosing on our properties and in our communities. Well, we're not going to continue to stand for that. We have lost wealth in our communities because most of our wealth was in our homes. We have struggled to buy homes because we have been taught, we have been told that if you're a real American in this country, you will strive to own a home. You will take out that mortgage. And so we signed on the dotted line for mortgages that we didn't understand, mortgages that we didn't think had clauses in them that would cause us to be foreclosed on because we would not be able to meet the interest rates that were going to be forced on us, different interest rates than when we first signed that mortgage. And so, as I talk about these big banks, if I sound a little bit agitated, I am. I am because we expect more, we want them to do more, and we're not begging for any give-outs or giveaways. We are talking about how do we participate as Americans in this economic way of doing business. And so, you know, we are being confronted day in and day out about whether or not we believe in capitalism. Of course we do. We have believed in it for far too long, but we have not been able to really participate in it. It is now time for all of them to understand that we're about the business of having you open up these opportunities. There are 186 diverse asset management firms in the United States, according to the aforementioned GAO report. These are 186 firms that are subjected to high barriers to entry. They have been forced to play by different rules, and that have had their work and accomplishments second-guessed and diminished. We all know that that's life as a person of color in this country. But when there are billions on the table, systems that are built to exclude us and devaluate us aren't just unfair, they are larcenous. And so, to even get their foot close to the door, not even in the door, but just close to it, diverse asset managers must have a long and successful track record, they say, of managing large pools of capital in an institutional environment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one way that we are constantly excluded, not only by the big banks, but throughout major corporations in America. They say to us, you must have lengthy experience. You must have so much money that you are basically managing. You must have this and you must have that. But really, when we look closely at how business is done oftentimes, it has nothing to do with your experience. It has nothing to do with not only your experience, but what you have demonstrated by way of being able to garner huge sums of money to manage. Now, I am reminded of something that I'd like to bring to your attention. It does not really have to do with asset management, but it's a peep into ways that business is done that absolutely excludes us. There is a bank in Chicago, Federal Savings Bank. The CEO, I believe, is Steve Koch. Anybody ever heard of that? Steve Koch is the CEO of that bank, and he is the one that, because of connections, decided that he should be in this administration. And so he sent a list of the cabinet positions that he would like to hold. And he said he would take the Treasury, he would even take HUD. And so he had a friend, and his name was Manafort. Have you heard of that name? And so Manafort was his friend, and Manafort decided that he needed millions of dollars, even though he was carrying a lot of debt, was not capable of repaying anybody, and was known to walk away from debt. And so Mr. Manafort set out to get him a position. And he told him that he may not be able to get him Treasury or HUD, but he thought he could get him the Secretary of the Army. And so Manafort, as we know now, having had a good look at his emails and other kinds of efforts, set out to make him the Secretary of the Army. And I'm told, even though I don't know for sure, that he thought that he had it made. He even went over to the offices of the Secretary of the Army to look around, to see where he would sit and how he would manage having this great position. Now, it did not happen because they're all busted by now, as you know, in what they were attempting to do in so many ways, not simply collusion with Russia and Putin and the oligarchs of Russia, but also obstruction of justice. And it's been playing out before our very eyes. But just think about it. Manafort got over 16 million, I believe, from this bank. This was supposedly a community bank. Now, we can't get loans from banks. As a matter of fact, when this president shut down the government, and we discovered that people were living from paycheck to paycheck, and some people had to go to nonprofits to see if they could get food and assistance for their families. It was Wilbur Ross in his cabinet that said, why don't they just go to the bank and get a loan? He's a multi-billionaire. And I'm taking it that either Wilbur Ross does not understand, does not get it, he's too far removed from the realities of today, or he just doesn't give a damn. And so I'm saying to you, it's these inside connections that are working against our best efforts to try and get involved. It is the old boys club. It's what happens on the golf course. It's what happens in the private clubs, on and on and on. How are we to break through with that when we confront them and they tell us, oh, you don't have enough experience. You don't have enough money under management. We don't know who you are. You don't have enough background. And so I'm saying to you, we have to get over accepting those excuses. When somebody tells you you don't have enough experience, you tell them, I'm here with you to get it right now. When they tell you, asset managers, you haven't had enough money under management, tell them, you contract with me and I'll up the amount that I'll have under management. Do not walk away. Do not think something is wrong with you. Do not believe that somehow you have not arrived at a time and period in your life where you deserve to be taken seriously. It is time for us to realize that we don't have to take a back seat. We don't have to feel as if somehow we're not deserving. We're deserving of everything and anything that we're able to get because of our background, our education, and whatever experience we have. And if you think something's wrong with that, you ask, how did this president get to be president of the United States of America? And so, as we move forward and we continue to talk about what is happening with the banks, and I mentioned to you that we had done a great job by the banks when we bailed them out. And I want to tell you, I have something to make up for, because at the time that we realized that we could go into a depression, and the secretary at that time came to us with this proposal for bailing them out. And we asked what other things could be done to avoid going into a deep depression. We were told that there was basically nothing that could be done. In a matter of hours, this country was going under. And so there were some members of Congress who did not quite believe it. There were others who believed it. I believed it. I believed that we were at a time and point where we were about to go under because of what had been happening over the last few days with Lehman Brothers and some others. And so I convinced some members of the Black Caucus to go along with the vote to bail them out. And we were told that there would be a program also in the Treasurer's office that would deal with foreclosures, that would deal with the problems in our communities, and that never happened. So I owe all of them everything that I can do to correct the mistake that I made along with some others when we bailed out the bid banks, and it has not been reciprocal in any way or any fashion. Okay, I want to talk about the importance of seeding and asset allocators. Seeding by fund of funds and asset allocators like PAMCO and Grosvenor, Blueprint, M2, and many others for operations and/or AUM, that is assets under management, can help diverse asset managers to launch their own firms and to build their own track records over time so that pension funds and/or institutional investors can accept their qualifications as their own. Asset allocators and fund of funds aren't providing these funds to be nice or because it's the right thing to do. These asset allocators know the successful results of the long-standing research that has shown how diverse asset managers perform historically. Research has shown that in many cases, diverse asset managers perform as well, if not better, than majority-owned firms. For example, a 2017 report commissioned by the Knight Foundation, researchers found that diverse asset managers have returns that are comparable to those of non-diverse asset managers. Nevertheless, the results are consistent with the findings of a 2018 study by McKinsey and Company, which looked at the business case for diversity and inclusion. McKinsey found that companies with high levels of diversity at the executive level were 33% more likely to be leading their industry in terms of profitability. McKinsey also found that companies with low levels of diversity at the executive level were 29% less likely to be above average when it comes to profitability. In short, the business case for diversity is strong, and the time for excuses is over. Now, we talked a little bit about asset managers and a little bit about the banks. But I want you to know that it is important to have diversity in the boardroom. The buck stops at the top. It's important to have diversity in management. And when we take a look at the average corporation in America, the hiring stops well below the management level. And even though they have diversity officers and others with the responsibility for inclusion and for diversity, somehow it does not get to the decision-making level where the input could help them to make better decisions. And so we've got to look at these corporations and these banks and their boardrooms. We've got to look at the flow charts and how the banks are organized and where the management levels are. And I intend to do just that. It's time for action. I've been engaged in this issue for 30 years. I'm one of the proud authors of Section 1116 of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act and Section 342 of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Together, these provisions direct most of the federal financial services agency to create these offices of minority and women inclusion, which we refer to as OMWIs. The agencies include the Department of the Treasury, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, that is FDIC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, that is the OCC, the Federal Reserve, we refer to as the Fed, the Securities and Exchange Commission, that is the SEC, the National Credit Union Administration, NCUA, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, and the Federal Housing Agency, FHFA. The OMWIs with these agencies have the important responsibility of overseeing all diversity matters in management, employment, and business activities at their agencies. The creation of these offices was a major step forward, but the laws that provide racial, ethnic, and gender equality are only as strong as the implementation and enforcement of these laws. As of yet, these OMWIs that I created have not fulfilled their full potential to create change and progress, in part because of, they say, they didn't know that they were empowered as such. They didn't quite understand what was being put in their hands. And of course, when we've had the heads of these agencies come before our committee, we have the responsibility for oversight and investigation. Many of them didn't even know they had an OMWI department in their agencies. And the OMNI directors had never met with or did not even know who the head of the agencies were. Now that Democrats have taken the majority in the House, and again, I have the gavel of the House Financial Services Committee, promoting diversity and opening up doors for diverse firms are top priorities. I have, for the first time in the history of the Congress of the United States of America, created in my committee a full subcommittee on diversity and inclusion, which will be tackling issues of diversity facing financial services industry, including workforce diversity and the issues impacting diverse asset managers that I have discussed today. The subcommittee will be chaired by Representative Joyce Beatty, and she's going to take a serious, methodical look at this issue. Representative Beatty is a passionate, informed, and highly experienced in these issues of diversity. She has begun meeting with diverse asset managers and experts to hear their perspectives. Next week, the subcommittee will hold its first hearing on the workforce diversity in the financial services industry. Within the next few months, we will begin the process of gathering data from financial institutions on biodiversity, including diversity of externally managed assets. We will hold hearings, we will meet with stockholders, including majority-owned firms, and we will come to an understanding of what the challenges are and what reasonable legislative remedies are needed in this space. And while I welcome input from stakeholders on this issue, there are at least 2 legislative ideas that I'm confident the committee will consider. Requiring disclosure of corporate board and C-suite diversity, and requiring disclosure of how much investment banks, pension funds, endowments, and others are spending with diverse firms. And so, again, I have the gavel, and I intend to use it. In the meantime, I call on companies, endowments, pension funds, and government entities to consider the following. Now, I have used the term emergent, and I used that 30 years ago when we created the emerging operation in California with PERS and STIRS. But I want you to know that it was considered at that time that they would be doing a great thing if they would create and set aside a certain amount of money that these emerging firms would have access to. And of course, that was a beginning, and we supported that. But when we talk about, or when the word emerging is used, and maybe it shouldn't be used so much anymore, and maybe we should avoid using the term, because while CalPERS must use the term because of the law in California, we believe, and we've been told, that the term emerging obscures the inequity facing diverse asset managers. Emerging implies a lack of size and expertise. The research I cited shows that many of the challenges faced by diverse firms are only partially related to size and tangentially related to expertise. Emergent also implies newness and unfamiliarity with the business of asset managers. These firms are not emerging. In many instances, they've been around for years, if not decades. Let's not insult their experiences by calling them emerging. Let's celebrate their perspective by calling them diverse, okay? Now, there's something else that many of you have been involved in religiously for a long time called supplier diversity. Just as with the term emerging, the term supplier diversity conjures up images of procurement offices and work orders for IT services, legal services, and construction work. Make no mistake, we need supplier diversity in these fields as well. But when we're talking about the management of billions of dollars in assets, if we conflate it with the purchase of widgets, we may be allowing companies that are good with working with diverse suppliers to allow those numbers to obscure their lack of work with diverse firms. I'm calling on all institutions to create a separate category specifically for their spending with diverse asset management firms. So, this is all we're saying. We got to the point where we had a well-organized effort around diversity suppliers. And they meet, I think, once a year or so, and they give percentages about what has happened in these corporations that are involved with this kind of onlook at what they're doing. But it's not enough, even though we appreciate what is going on with diversity suppliers. We can't get stuck there so that we're only selling toilet paper. Everybody needs it, but we've got to be able to get into the big money. And so we want to make sure that we're not confused in what we're talking about. Yes, we continue with the diversity supplier efforts, but we want you to not go to these national conference and come away with, oh, it has improved by another 3%, a 5%, a 10%. Enough with the percentages that are produced. Give us the real data. Give us the information. Who are the firms? How much money have you spent with them? And so if you're going to do that in dealing with diverse supplier efforts, get the real information so that you don't keep getting played off in ways that we've been played off for so long. Can you do that? I know there's some of you in here are saying, I'm involved with supplier diversity, and I've been working with it for the last 20 years, and we have made some improvements. Prove it. And so I talked a little bit about increased board and C-suite diversity. Many companies like Amazon and Facebook are taking steps to diversify their boards, and while these are important steps, much more is needed. And while the conversation on board diversity has now entered the mainstream, diversity in the C-suite is just as important and is badly lacking. A GAO report that I and other lawmakers requested found that from 2007 to 2015, there was only a modest improvement in the overall representation of minorities in management positions in the financial services industry, and very troubling, representation of African Americans at the management level actually decreased, falling from 6.5% to 6.3%. Responsible companies should diversify, both on their boards and in the C-suite. Adopt the GAO recommendations to improve diversity in asset management. In its 2017 report, GAO recommended that the federal pension funds it studied should adopt 4 key practices in order to increase opportunities by diverse asset managers. The key practices were, number 1, top leadership commitment to diversity. 2, remove potential barriers to entry. 3, conduct outreach about opportunities and communicate priorities and expectations about including diverse firms to staff and consultants. I will be following up with these agencies administering these funds to check on their status in implementing these recommendations. However, I think these recommendations should also be implemented by the investment banks as well. I think that we should implement what is known as a Rooney Rule for the hiring of diverse asset management firms. We're all familiar with the Rooney Rule and its success in diversifying the coaching of staff on NFL teams. You've heard of that. I think Rooney Rule principles can also apply here. When investment banks are interviewing firms for asset management opportunities, they must commit to interview at least one diverse firm. They cannot go forward unless at least one firm is being interviewed. Diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a reality. We must all accept the challenge of diversifying the ranks of companies across the country and working to close that wealth gap. So I thank you for having me here today, and I know that there's a lot of speculations about me and my new position and what I'm going to do. There are some lobbyists on K Street who are saying we don't have to worry about her. She is going to be spending all of her time investigating Trump and this administration and that which falls under my committee. Of course, I am looking at certain things that fall under my committee, having to do with the sanctions that we placed on Russia and the lack of implementation by Mr. Mnuchin, who is the Secretary of the Treasury. Of course, I'm looking at money laundering, and while I have hit the banks a little bit hard today, you haven't seen anything until you see what I'm going to do with Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank, known as the money laundering bank, who is the only bank in the world that will lend money to the Trump family and to the Trump organization because of the way that he's filed bankruptcies and he's not lived up to, repaying the debt that he's owed. And so Deutsche Bank is the only bank that would lend them money. And we've got to find out a lot about Deutsche Bank and its relationship to Trump and his activities and why the money was loaned, how it was loaned, whether or not it's being paid back. And so we're working on all of that. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for putting up with and enduring my rattling on all of the things that I'm concerned about and what I plan to do with this new position. But I want you to know I owe that to you. I owe that to our community. I owe that to Reverend Jackson. For the years that he has worked, and the years that I have worked, and the years that many of you have suffered because you have not been able to realize your real talent, because you have been excluded, I owe this to you. And I want to tell you, at my age, I have no fear. At my age, even though I'm hit every day by the right-wingers, I have no fear. I can't be embarrassed. I can't be stopped. It is so important that I indicate to our young people that we stand for something, that we're going to fight for them to have opportunities. The millennials have said to us, I like it when you speak truth to power. I like it when you stand up to them. But what they're not saying is you haven't done it enough. It hasn't worked well for us. We have gone to school. We have graduated. We have done everything that you have told us to do, only to find we can't get a job. If we get a job, it is not worth going to work every day because of the pay that's offered to us. And we are disappointed in what we thought would be available to us when we come of age, when we graduate, and we're ready to start our careers. Millennials, I'm sorry about that. But one of the things I've talked to the banks about is I want you to create a millennial project. I want you to tell me how you're going to stop treating millennials the way you've treated us traditionally when you looked at our backgrounds and our credit records and how many jobs we've had and decided whether or not we were stable or not. And when you look at the millennials and you talk about stability and you say, well, they work 3 or 4 jobs. They're working for Lyft. They're working for Uber. And they're waiting tables. They're doing that because they can't make enough money at one job. And so I want you to create a product for them. I've told them that. I don't know what they're going to come back with. But, of course, we're going to have the CEOs of all of the major banks in our committee. We're going to be asking them some questions. Many of them don't want to come. And many of them think that perhaps we're going to be too hard on them. But just as they are speculating about how we're going to relate to them, and the K Street lobbyists are speculating about how I'm going to spend my time, they don't really know. All they know is that I'm the new chair, and I've got the gavel, and they've got to come. And so when you come, you will find out. Thank you very much.